Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. Really excited to dive into another guest episode, having a reoccurring guest with Landon Shafer on here today, and excited just to talk with him. He's our crop insurance agent and really diving into some different things that are going on right now, some different changes that we're going to highlight. And so, Landon, real quick, give us just a little recap about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Thanks, Garrett. Landon Shafer with Farmers Mutual Hail. Live in Elkhorn, Nebraska, just outside of Omaha. Let's see, I've been in the crop insurance industry in several capacities for about 17 years. Everything from crop adjusting, helping train agents, roll out new products with agents on behalf of crop insurance companies, and then just always enjoy working with producers on the ground. So that'd be about it. It's been a long run, and every year is something new. So, and that's what we're going to get into a little bit here today. Nothing stays the same.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I'm excited to dive into this conversation. We're going to cover a lot of things. But before that, I feel like crop insurance is one of those things that's definitely kind of an afterthought, especially this time of year. You're like, well, the crop is already pretty much made. Our decisions are already made. Why are we talking about this? Well, we'll get into that in a second. But I want to highlight the importance of crop insurance. And I feel like in order to do that, we look at just, for example, kind of look at the different operations around you. Maybe look at the different operators that are doing a really good job. And in most cases, they're doing a lot of things right. Okay. A lot of different areas of their business they're getting right. They're paying attention to and they're managing at a high level. And this is one of those. All right. This is definitely a tool that we need to utilize within the crop insurance world. We can utilize some different areas for the row crop and even the livestock. We're going to probably talk primarily row crop today. If we get some time, we'll touch on the cattle side of things and the livestock. But, if you look at those operations, they're getting this right, all right? And especially in the row crop world right now in farming, there's a lot of pressure to get things right because we're not looking at a good year. And next year doesn't look any better, to be honest, right? So we need to make sure that we're well-versed in this. We need to make sure that we're very knowledgeable, and so that way we can do the best we can with the information that we have. So I use that to kind of set the stage for this conversation, and we're not going to bore you here. This is important things that we need to get to know, and so that way we can really hone in and make the best decisions possible. So I really preference that before we dive in today and before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts here. Now, I also want to say, kind of taking a step back, Landon, just full disclosure, is our crop insurance agent. We've been working together for the last couple of years and really worked well together. Really happy with the knowledge that we get from working with Landon, willing to actually inform us about the different products that are out there, why we choose them, the different coverages that we can actually choose from, and using crop insurance as a tool once again, right? And so, a little side note before we really dive into this, one of the things that we actually did this year was a little bit different when it comes to our acreage reporting. We used precision data to actually submit our planting savings. And so, Landon, real quick, let's talk about that. Are you using that a lot with a lot of your clients, or what does that look like? Obviously, for us, we're going to tell you some of the numbers that we saw back on our farm, but maybe just share a little bit about that side of the acreage reporting data.
Yeah, the precision crop insurance to start is really supported by RMA. They know that data is accurate data. So they have really made some great improvements to it over the years, and the crop insurance companies are adapting to it as well. They've been investing heavily into direct connections of systems and platforms as well with a number of different companies out there, whether, it's a My John Deere or Ag Leader or Field View. Not to name a lot of names here, but there are a lot of partnerships being set up to make that process as streamlined as possible. The first thing I will say is acres reported by Precision are the first acreage reports done every year. because we don't have to wait on FSA. We are using your planted acres, planted within that boundary, with all overlap taken out. So we have some real exact numbers coming within that boundary. And you see a lot of benefit, especially when you get into some fields that have more rough boundaries, grassback terraces. We can really see some big improvements in acreage reporting. So from an agency standpoint, it's nice to see those acres come in through precision because we can get ahead of the game on our workload. We're not playing catch up constantly waiting on farmers to get to FSA, with their turn and sign up. So it puts us out there ahead. So, on your farm there, we saw an acre savings, right? That is not always the case for everybody, but what's true is what's true. And that's what you plant, right? And most guys are more happy to be accurate than to have a number that matches FSA, whether that is high or low. So in your case, there was an acre savings. And so when there's an acre savings like that, every planted acre savings could be 2 or 3 or 4 different premium acres, right? Because you've got your base policy, you could have your county-based policy on top of that, your crop hail policy on top of that, right? Right there, that'd be 3 acres savings in 1 planted acre savings. Okay. So we've got our premium savings. That helps pay for all that equipment that you've got in the cab. And from there, it has APH implications. So let's just, for a quick example, one I always like to give, let's say you harvest 20,000 bushels and FSA says you have a 100 acre field. Well, that's a 200 bushel yield. If you really only plant 97 acres and you still get that 20,000 bushels from it, now you've got a 206 bushel yield. Okay. So over time, if we keep doing that, your APH is going to increase, increasing your guarantee, and then also increasing the level at which a loss triggers. Okay. So a lot of benefits there. And then to keep on going from there, loss adjusting gets to be streamlined. But with the production side, whether it's a non-loss or a loss, we can use that precision data to capture production. Okay. So again, that connection with, for instance, maybe my John Deere to your agent, when you finish harvesting, you just push that production, comes into our systems, we get a signature, production reporting is done. Okay. And I can attest from what farmers tell me, the RMA rule is that machine has to be calibrated per manufacturer standards within 3%. When I say 3% to almost every single farmer, they kind of scoff that off and say, well, 3% is pretty bad. We're always sub 1. So we'll be fine there, right? If it is a loss situation, that same production just comes right in. The adjuster's got it in his hands. He's not gathering settlement sheets. He's not gathering feed records. He's not measuring bins. Claims can just move right along at a much faster pace. We can click losses off. So, and it doesn't always have to come straight from the monitor. It could be grain cart, scales, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's accuracy, it's speed, and it's efficiency. That's what we're looking for. Just utilizing some of that you already have.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think that's important because most of us are going to have that technology in the cab anyways. Right. And so I'm willing to share because people want to know some numbers, and I'm willing to share the numbers because I feel like it added up this year. Right. So we had roughly 20 acres. I think if my math was right, if I'm remembering correctly, roughly 20 acres difference between our planted precision data and the FSA. So, and I kind of pose this as, would you have a 20 acre field that you'd want to be paying crop insurance on that you're not even planting or not even using? No, I mean, nobody would want to do that. And so I feel like that's a pretty big savings right there. And for us, we took out a fairly high coverage level with some of the different options that we had just for lots of different reasons. But so what this equated to was roughly $1,162 in savings, just pure savings because we used this information versus that. And it didn't take any extra time or data or really time or hassle to put it together. So I wanted to throw that out there. We're not large operators, but there's still a pretty big savings right there. So not to beat that dead horse too much, but there's a lot of value in using that. And that's one of the things that through working with Landon, through working with his agency and FMH, we've been able to implement and utilize on our farm. So I wanted to kind of highlight that before we get into kind of the main guts here. I guess, Landon, any other comments there on that side of things with the precision data?
Yeah. No, everybody has their objections. And I think most of them we could argue or talk our way through. But one popular objection is guys don't want to reduce their planted acres at FSA. Okay. So what your crop insurance says as far as planted acres does not have to match your FSA. So if you're worried about your base acre history at FSA for some of these, farm disaster plans, go ahead and continue to report those higher acres or the acres that FSA says it is. So just thought I might throw that one out there, because there is always some common objections out there, and those discussions are always had. So
Right, definitely. So good comments there. Now, let's ask ourselves, as we were recording this, we're looking at the end of August, right? And so why are we talking now? And so we're going to get into that. By the time you guys hear this, it's going to be a couple weeks later. We're going to be looking at the first part of September. But why are we talking now? What are some things that have maybe been changing? And let's just kind of go from here, and we'll see where the conversation goes.
okay, well, it used to be that being in sales and crop insurance, it was a whole lot easier. But it seems like sales is a year-round task anymore. Okay, there's always something going on. And I know we have a big crowd, very diverse crowd on here. So besides the typical 9:30 sales closing date on some small grains and fall seeded crops that we're always quoting at this time, there is some other additional plans that have been available for a number of years, like margin protection. So on margin protection, there's a number of crops that it's available. We've got spring seeded wheat, corn, soybeans, and I might be missing a couple there for sure. But we are, if you are interested in margin protection, we are having to quote that and sell that and get that bound on next year's planted crop. Okay. And it only makes sense because these products are looking at price discovery in the fall, right? We are starting that next marketing year for our next crop. So with margin protection, we can capture a third price discovery to go alongside our RP coverage or our SCO coverage or our ECO coverages in the spring. So margin protection is one of those products that we've got a sales closing date on our spring planted crops in 2026. And that sales closing date here is 9/30. There are some other new products rolling out as well with a 9/30 sales closing date. So we'll get into that. But the long and the short is it's always sales season anymore. And I know, Garrett, waited to start this call because you're talking about next year's seed purchases, right? So in my mind, I don't like the fact that most people wait until March 15th to start making their crop insurance decisions because that's the last one. And the last one always gets the least amount of attention. So with some of these other products and us talking earlier, I feel like we can accomplish more good this way.
Right. Absolutely. And I agree because we are starting that. And once again, that kind of brings me back to the whole crop insurance is an afterthought. And let's try to make this more of a forethought, try to be a little bit more proactive here as we're trying to have this conversation. So you talked about margin protection. I think there's a couple other things we're going to talk about, some other changes. But for those of us that don't know, what is margin protection? Break it down on a simplified level and let's go from there.
Yeah. So in any given year, we are able to produce a lot of revenue, right? And that's what our base policies do is we're ensuring yield times price. And we know we've got a revenue guarantee out there, and everybody's from a different area that could be tuning in here. Maybe you're from one of those areas where you've got the best dirt and lots of rain and you're always able to grow crop, right? And we have the ability to market bushels and things like that. Or maybe you're here in Nebraska where we've got pivots and we can water ourselves to a lot of revenue every single year. So maybe what we really have more of a problem with is creating margin or having margin at the end of the day because we have all of these big input costs. So what margin protection is that's what it is. We're ensuring that margin. We've got a guarantee of revenue set by an expected yield and a price that we're setting. And then we're also going through price discovery period now to see what the base prices are for our expected input costs. And then we also, later in the year, we'll look at what those expected input costs are again in the spring. We're applying those to the field. And then through the year, we'll revisit price again at harvest time. And what we're ultimately trying to do is we're ensuring margin. So through that time period, what happened to our yields in our area, what happened to our price, and then also what happened to our input costs through the year. So, if our final revenue comes down and our input costs go up from now until spring, we've narrowed our margin, which is going to prompt and trigger a loss. Okay. And, maybe just the opposite. Maybe our prices go up, our yields go up, and our expenses go down through the year. We've increased our margin there. So we've decreased our opportunity at a payment. But what have we done? We saw our margins improve over time. So, a little bit different than revenue protection because it's got the added component of the input costs. But what I really look at for margin protection the biggest benefit is giving me that third price discovery. Okay. So I have the option with my RP policy to basically get my put on price on March 15th when I purchased then after price discovery in February. I can get the higher of the price. If the price increases, my revenue guarantee will increase at harvest time if the price is higher. If it's lower, then I'm going to have a probability of loss. But when I buy that margin protection alongside my base policy, it is giving me that added benefit of price discovery now. So if I like the price today on my 2026 crop, margin protection, and then we'll get into it here in a little bit, the new option, margin coverage option, that's what I want to be looking at now. If I want to lock in price today with some insurance, those are my options. I don't have to wait until March.
Okay. So one question that I had through that, and it's more in the details, but when we're talking that third price discovery, when is that happening? That's probably coming up pretty soon. Is that going off of, let's just talk about corn, December 2026, that board, or what's that going off of?
Correct. We are in price discovery right now for both the crop price and our input costs. Okay. So the input costs, we're looking at the board, and same with the grains. So we are looking at December futures on corn and November futures on soybeans, 2026 year.
Okay. Nope, that's good to know. And I asked that because I feel like there's a fair amount of sentiment that, prices could continue to decline if we have this monstrous crop, right? We probably won't know how big this crop truly is until after price discovery. And so if we have this price discovery, and I forgive me because I haven't looked at that December 2026 price, but we actually did about a week ago, we did a contract that it was a fairly decent level yet. I want to say somewhere around that 450 level. So, not a bad price, all things considered, where we are right now. And so usually those months that are further out, like that's an entire year out plus, those months don't adjust as much as the current months do. And so I know we're not talking about marketing here, but just something to keep in mind as far as, how those things change. So maybe it'd be a little bit more favorable price. And then as we look at bringing in another crop, we could pull another 50 cents off. And it's hard to say how that's all going to play out. So just some different thoughts. Now, from a producer standpoint, what would make me want to actually consider this, or who would this be a good fit for? Or at this point, do you want to talk about that other option? I guess, where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, maybe let's go to that other option that just rolled out, and that would be margin coverage option. Okay. What most people fear when it comes to margin protection, maybe let's talk about why people don't buy margin protection, is when you are buying margin protection, you are insuring your crop from 95% down. Okay. So you are buying a lot of coverage. If you're buying a lot of coverage, there's a lot of premium associated. And since we're talking to a group that could be from many areas, we're talking an additional $55, $65, $75, $85, right? Because we are buying insurance on that whole crop. And one of the tough things about it is if you have a policy alongside it, like your RP policy, you have that premium there associated as well. Well, since you can't get paid for more than your crop is worth, right? We can't dip out of both pools of coverage. I can't exactly, and an agent can't exactly tell you what margin protection is going to actually cost you today, because there's a premium credit associated depending on what level of coverage you buy in March, what your crop rotation is on your acres and your different APH databases, and then also what that spring price is. So there's a lot of fear in saying, yeah, I'm interested in taking a new product or taking a coverage, but I'm not exactly sure if it's going to cost me $65 or $85. Okay. So the new option that just rolled out here is margin coverage option. We'll just call it a much simpler margin protection plan. And it's simpler in the fact that there's less variables on the input costs, right? Fixed costs aren't in there. So, we're just looking at costs like fertilizers, fuel, things like that go into the crop. And really a one-on-one conversation would probably be had to talk more about this on that local level. So the other reason it's much simpler is it's just ensuring a band of coverage that is the same gap as your ECO coverage. Okay, so it's ensuring instead of 95 down to 0, we're going to insure 95 down to 90 or 86% coverage level. And then from there, your SCOs or your stacks on your cotton kick in. So since it is a fixed band that does not overlap with your RP, an agent can tell you exactly what that's going to cost today. And then again, since it's a band of coverage that doesn't overlap, 9% band of coverage, it's instead of talking about $85 a cost per acre, it could be $15, $16, $17, right? And again, we're kind of living in that corner world here right now for just discussion. So the appetite to quote unquote buy your put by 9:30 is going to be a little bit more palatable. So that will have guys excited to talk about it.
Right. Just from the outside looking in, margin protection sounds like it was maybe complicated, maybe expensive, and probably hard to sell from a sales standpoint. So I'm sure this is why they came up with this other option, was to make that a little bit easier to kind of get into producers' minds and to actually grasp that. So yeah, I guess what else does a guy kind of need to know about the margin coverage option?
Well, another reason there's going to be some appetite to where that premium is palatable is because on margin coverage option, the subsidy's at 65%. Or no, actually, I had to rewrite this whole script for today because just this morning, a bunch of news came out. So actually, margin coverage option is going to be subsidized at 80% compared to margin protection is only at, I believe, 44%, depending on your coverage level. So, I've always been a big proponent of buying something and chasing, this premium support. I might say it might be a little bit softer word. If we can get any help we can get to buy these revenue products and lower our costs, that's what we want to do. So that 80% subsidy is going to be huge. The simplicity of it's going to have guys excited. So I wish I could start quoting for people today, but it's going to be a little bit because this announcement just came out. At the time when this is released, we'll be in full swing of quoting everybody's corn and soybeans, cotton, and things like that. So a couple other things to remember. These margin protection, margin coverage option, ECO, SCO, they're all similar in that they are an area-based coverage plan. I hate to even bring that up because then some people stop listening, but there is value. What happens in a county really reflects a lot of what a producer is feeling as well, especially when we're looking at purchasing these to protect price. And that's the main reason we're doing it. Yes, there is an input cost component to margin coverage option, but I'm buying it because I want that price protection and I want that price discovery period. So again, we are going to be using that county expected yield times price to see if we have a shortfall in revenue.
Sure. Yeah. I'm trying to think as to where a guy wants to go from here because, we talk about this different option out here. For you, with this option, this margin coverage option, what's your overall sentiment? I know you're probably just trying to digest it as things just came out. Things are just now happening. But are you pretty excited about this, being able to have this as an option out there? Now, is this, because you said this is more or less kind of that banded coverage, is this going to replace like ECO if a guy's wanting to take this and you can kind of get some of this out here now? Another question that I'm just thinking about before I forget it is, when are the premiums due for this? Just so producers have an idea as to when that could actually be coming out of their account. Talk about a few of those things.
Yeah. So the easy one is, billing aligns with your base policy. So you'll get billed on it, next September. Okay. So you're going to get that coverage in place. Bills will be due the same time as your ECO or your RP policy would be. Yes. My gut tells me with MCO coming out, margin coverage option, that we just basically put margin protection on the shelf. Guys are not going to have an appetite to be talking about $60, $70, $80 premiums when they can be talking about a $15 premium. Okay. We can take that opportunity. If we like that futures price now, like 26 futures, we can lock in and get a put on 9% for a crop. And you cannot go to a broker or to your elevator and buy a put for the price that we're going to get margin coverage option because of that subsidy. And maybe we might discuss that some more too. But yeah, as these prices go up and down and you're making the calls and everything else, you also have to pay commissions, all those things. You don't have to worry about any of that. So you can get that put at that 95% band down to 86% of your revenue and have started making some decisions. And then when the spring comes, you want to take a 75% policy on your RP. That'll be your band of coverage. You've got your options for your SCO there as well. But if you don't like the price on margin coverage option today, everybody needs to be quoting it, take a peek at it, see what it's going to cost. If today's not the day for you to take action at that 95% level, next March 15th, you still have the ECO route to go. And again, 8 out of 10 years, that input component doesn't move enough to really drive the decision on whether you want to take margin coverage option or ECO. It's really just timing and price discovery. Like, I think that's the biggest hang up on margin protection, and what people call complicated is they're putting too much emphasis on the complications instead of really what is it doing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to allude to this, but my plan is everything can work out with the podcast and the guest. I'm actually hoping to have our marketing advisor on with the next one. We'll stack that on top, and so he's one that probably would be more in favor of puts. And so that's just what he works in. So I think it's good to have the information to digest both kind of different, in this case, options, right? We talk about different options. And so I think that's a really good idea to consider because a lot of people could be looking at this price next year and be saying, hey, this is a pretty good price. For $15 an acre, it doesn't really cost much to put this option, this floor. I guess we keep throwing around that word put. For those of you that don't know, that's more of just a floor, right? That's a floor to protect your downside, and then you can still have your upside potential there, right? So it's not locking you into a price. So wanted to clarify that as we throw around some of these different words if you're not familiar with them, okay? So really good discussion there as to some of the different things that could be out there to look into. Any other thoughts on kind of the margin protection there? I guess margin coverage option. I'm getting confused here. They always make these things sound so similar. So kudos to you for being able to keep them separate.
I stumble on myself at times and have to correct myself. So, no. Yeah, I do think that increase in subsidy. And so maybe we'll talk about the reason I had to scrap my notes this morning and basically start over after an announcement. It was announced today that we are going to have 80% subsidy on MCO, SCO, and ECO. Right? The Big Beautiful Act, Washington, D.C. has a big agenda to take care of farmers here and help provide some positive outlook on things, I guess. A number of you probably already know, but you can get up to 5% more subsidy on your base policy as well. And the other big change that kind of came yesterday or early this morning was those younger farmers. They're wanting to take care of those guys. So the beginning farmer and rancher benefits have been expanded from 5 years to 10 years. Okay. So what that is that's an additional 10, 11, oh gosh, up to 15% extra subsidy that those newer producers can get. Maybe you're a younger farmer, but you've been farming for more than 5 years. So you've been outside of that window for beginning farmer or rancher. Well, now if you are within that 10-year window, you can add this beginning farmer or rancher on there, get some extra subsidy and some other benefits as well. So they're trying to help those young guys that are trying to make it on the farm. And if you're a young guy that's just starting in this environment, you're going to want all the help you can get. So there's some given that way as well.
Comment on that. Would sell that beginning farmer or rancher. Would that be kind of like the same status that the FSA would put on you as well? So kind of still fitting their criteria there?
I can't recall the exact criterias, so I probably shouldn't compare here right now.
Sure. But I guess either way, something to kind of keep in mind, if you're maybe within that window, definitely look into it. It doesn't hurt to ask these questions. You never know. You may find yourself that you end up qualifying. So yeah, something to keep in mind there. Definitely be aware of. So yeah.
Just one more thought to that. If you are signing up and the first sales closing date you have is 3/15/26, you can sign up for that extended beginning farmer and rancher then. But if we went past a few sales closing dates, like July 1st, September 30th, some of these others, you have up until November 30th here, 2025, to get that added to some of these recent sign up periods that we have already had. So you haven't missed your chance to get that benefit on some of these policies you've already bought. So keep that date in mind, November 30th. You'll want to visit with your agent to see if you can get that benefit added.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good reason to be talking today for sure. All right. I guess any other thoughts as far as some different changes happening with these different coverage options and the margin protection and all that stuff? Or where do you want to go from here?
Probably not a lot of other changes to discuss right now, but why are we buying these? Like, we have price decline right now. We're living in it. That's why we bought our coverages back and made those decisions in 2025. So if we kind of want to just stick to corn and beans here for the most part, not to ignore the other crops, but those are the ones that get the attention. Our base price last spring on corn was $4.70. We're not in harvest price discovery just yet. That doesn't start until October. But looking at December futures right now, we're at $4.11. That's right now about a 12.5% decline on price. Soybeans, again, price discovery is in October, looking at November soybeans. Last spring, when we purchased our insurance, we had $10.54 soybeans, and right now we're at $10.56. So currently the price is flat on that. Not to get into what I think the outlook on prices is going to be, but there's, a big crop out there. That's what they keep telling us, whether it's the USDA or Pro Farmer, we're seeing a lot of big numbers come in. So we'll see what the implications are and how that affects our price going into harvest discovery here in October. So, knowing that you got a 12% drop in price, what that does is when that price drops, that effectively raises the yield at which you will have a loss trigger. So all of these discussions go into how and why we picked our coverage levels last spring.
Right, right. And I think that's important to keep those numbers in mind and maybe to have the conversation back with your agent like we're doing today, like I'm doing here talking with Landon. But as you go into the fall, it may not hurt to know once we get into price discovery and even furthermore, once that price is actually set, we want to know, okay, where is that trigger yield actually at? In our minds, we might be thinking that, okay, our guarantee was at like 185, or I'm just throwing out a number, right? For corn. So our guarantee was at this, so we might forget about it. All right, we're harvesting 210 bushel corn or whatever the case is. Things are a lot better. We're not even thinking about a loss or indemnity payment, right? But, in this case, if we've got a pretty big price decline, maybe there isn't a trigger yield out there that we need to keep in mind. So it's not a bad idea to have an idea as to where those different kind of levels are at, just so you can be prepared, not only to turn everything in case you have a loss, but even from to taking the step back as a business owner, as a farmer, as you're going to the fields, just knowing, even from like an emotional standpoint, just knowing roughly where those different triggers are at can help you just to manage, okay, man, for whatever reason, this field did not do very good, but remembering that I took out some individual coverage, and so it's going to be impacting on this field. So, okay, even though I am below my other yields, I might have a payment here just to kind of help you a little bit. Because I think there's going to be a lot of stress going into this year with the sentiment around ag and all the pressure with everything that we're dealing with. So long rant there, but long story short, it's good to know kind of where those different levels are at to keep in mind.
Yeah. And just like last year, your agent can generate paperwork for you and forms to say, okay, with your APA and your guarantees what they are, and now the harvest price being what it is now, you can in an instant get a report that's going to tell you where your yield loss trigger starts as the price goes down and your yield trigger moves up. So that information is readily available to you that you can just have in cap.
Yeah, and I want to add to that because, okay, and like I said, I don't mean to be doom and gloom here with talking about so much downtimes in ag, but like let's say theoretically you're going into your banker's office ahead of time, you're talking to him, maybe you're looking at some losses, maybe you're just looking at some hard times. I feel like that would reassure him and build that relationship to even take that with him. As as the producer, hey, this is what my different kind of indemnity payments are going to start. These are what my different levels are going to be, just so he knows you're aware of where they're at and you're going to do your best. At this point, we probably can't change these yields too much, right? There's not a whole lot we can do from a management standpoint. But hey, we know when those bushels kind of hit the band, we know what we're kind of getting for yields. At least we know kind of where those different levels are going to be that might start kind of triggering that. So another kind of side comment, to have that piece of paper like Landon's talking about, make sure your agent's willing to produce that for you and use that to strengthen your relationships with your lender or just even for your own use.
Right. The numbers don't lie, right? We all got to know our numbers.
Absolutely.
So I might carry on from there and let's just talk about claims a little bit. Okay. Because a lot of times when guys have these big crops, they maybe don't do as much due diligence in tracking their production. And we've got that unseen loss out there in price loss. So some things to think about. And maybe before I get to that, what we have first is we need to remember if you are shopping silage, you need to get that turned in. We've got to have that appraisal done to know what that yield is going to be out there to establish what your final harvest revenue was to pay your losses. And if you shop silage without an appraisal, that crop is destroyed without consent and the insurance is no longer there. It's void and null. So, and we're at that time of year, right? It won't be long. Silage cutters will be running in our area, and I know they're running in other areas already. So get those silage appraisals requests turned in.
And with silage, it's one of those to where usually things start moving pretty fast all of a sudden, like, hey, the cutter's going to be here in 10 days. Oh, it stayed hot and dry. He's going to be here in 5 days. Oh, crap. I haven't called my agent. If you're going to chop, if you consistently chop, or maybe you're going to do something different this year and you're thinking about chopping, even if you're not going to, if it's on the back of your mind, just make that call. do it ahead of time. Do it now as you're listening to this, because you don't want to have to worry about the implications if you don't make that call.
Right. The adjuster can't do what he doesn't know.
Definitely.
And there's a lot of guys delivering last year's crop, right? They're cleaning out their bins. But if your bins aren't empty and you're going to be putting some new crop on top of old crop, in that instance there, an adjuster has to come out and measure and mark that bin. Okay. So I know you could still be taking plenty of old crop out here right now and not know where you're going to be. But before that new crop goes in there, we need to have that measured. Once you're putting different fields into that bin between units, you can mark your own bins, right? But that old crop has got to be measured first. And keep your production separate by unit. I mentioned marking between the bins, right? Now we're kind of getting outside of that realm of precision that we talked about, like we want to promote and we like so much. But if we are traditional, we need to keep those units marked separately. Even if you are an enterprise unit, right? That history is built field by field, regardless of what your unit structure is. And maybe someday you want to go back to an optional unit versus enterprise. We got to know what that production is separate, unit by unit. Okay, so let's go to harvest. If you are precision, like we kind of kicked off with here today, we talked about how we have to calibrate those machines. So if you're going to go precision crop insurance and we're going to be using some of that data, you'll want to calibrate at least once per crop and be within 3% on that final calibration. All that calibrating is done to manufacturer standards, right? It's not a standard that RMA or crop insurance company or anybody else. It's that manufacturer standard. So have that last one within 3%. And I recommend corn, if you're doing high moisture corn early, get a calibration. If you're doing dry corn later, get a calibration because that machine is going to read differently. So on your grain cart scales as well that you want to use, make sure those are calibrated. There are some rules that allow if you have some third-party verified scales that are fixed scales on the farm, those got to be, I'm missing the words here for it right now, but it's got to be calibrated and certified yearly as well. And then there's some other rules that go into, and that'd be more of an individual conversation, but those scales, if you want those to be a hard record, they have to be a contiguous log of all loads, right? Very similar to what an elevator does. Okay. And I know there's a number of units out there like that, but if your on-farm scales aren't that, they are just considered a soft record. Okay. So it's used to verify those bin measurements and things like that.
So I guess here's where I'll kind of piggyback off of that. And I'm going to make my plug here for the precision side of things, because one thing that's been hands down a return on investment for us would be our Libra grain cart. So for those of you that are not familiar, Libra grain cart is basically a Bluetooth scale that you hook up to your existing grain cart. So if your grain cart has scales, usually it's a pretty plug and play process. Instead of hooking up to the back of your display, you hook up into this little box with the Bluetooth display, or it's a Bluetooth and it goes to your iPad. All right. So most of us, we're talking 2025, most of us have an iPad, right? So take that iPad, stick it in your tractor, download the Libra grain cart scale on there. And then now all of a sudden you have this hard record, this hard data. And this has worked so well for us on our operation, and it's easy, right? So measuring bins is easy to forget about. And measuring bins isn't always accurate. You do the best that you can, right? But things happen. We make errors. We're human nature, right? So things just happen. With the Libra grain cart, I'm not selling this by no means, but sounds like a salesman here, but they work so good because they automatically detect the loads, right? So once you start unloading, it's automatically going to record that. So we're not having to worry about push buttons to make sure we record this load or where did it go and all this stuff. And, you can kind of go back in there, and if a load went to the wrong place, you can go back in and change that, right? So there's nice, really good features there. And, really from a cost standpoint, everything's going to have a little bit of a cost associated with it. But this is something, even if you have a small claim, just by having accurate numbers, just by saving yourself the time, and you can almost get that thing to pay for itself in the first year. I mean, and I don't know what they cost currently, but they're probably right around $2,500, maybe $3,000. So it's not cheap, but at the same time, for what you're getting on those that information there, and it's a good hard record. And they make other systems out there. That's just the one that we have experience with. So that's my plug for that. Really good system out there that's really easy to use.
I'll echo, all these tools that we have in a non-loss year, make your agent very happy because it's really simple to get accurate production, get the numbers on a form and get it signed, right? We're not chasing down lots of settlement sheets and things like that. But I can tell you adjusters, it makes their lives 100% better if we're using precision data, if we're using grain cart scales and things like that, because you can just export that data, and on a large farm, there could be 3,000 loads. If we were doing tickets and settlement sheets, an adjuster would have to keep. But with all this other precision data or green card scales, right? There's just reports that come out of that we just copy and paste, and that adjuster can just keep moving. So yeah, we could talk all day about the benefits of it and the accuracy. So
Yeah, absolutely.
and maybe to go a little bit further there, when it comes to if you have a loss and we're getting settlement sheets from elevators, that settlement sheet, it's got to be a settlement sheet or a summary sheet, maybe kind of depending on your elevator, that shows 100% of that production. Garrett and I could have a share on a crop. If that adjuster is working a loss, they need to see 100% of that grain, not just my insured share, right? So they need to see, Garrett and I's 100% share there together. And these elevators are even having some different export outputs as well to make life easier for the adjuster too. So you let that adjuster know where you delivered that grain, they'll call and ask and see if they can get some of that stuff from them. So
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe another thing to just kind of talk about here, because other than last year, it's been 4, 5, 6 years where RMA, because of hardship in agriculture, has been deferring interest on crop insurance bills. So, the billing date never changed. It was September 1st, like always, or August 15th, technically. Bills were going out end of August, early September, but you didn't have to have it paid by that initial due date, right? They were letting you more or less carry that no interest, more or less interest free for a couple more months, and you didn't have to pay until the end of November and not take that interest hit. They are not doing that this year. So it will be billing as normal. So bills are going out the door as we speak. You'll want to have those paid by September 30th to avoid any interest attaching. And I'm going to make a plug here because, it doesn't matter where you're at, whether you're an agent, whether you're the crop insurance company or the farmer, there's some frustrations with being able to depend on your checks getting to the insurance company timely, right? So I'm going to make my plug here. Make your payments online. Then we don't have to worry about the checks being lost in the mail. We don't have to worry about interest attaching and the he said, she said of what time they got there, right? Because there's getting to be a little less value as far as when that letter or that bill is postmarked. Okay. That postmark is good to say, hey, you paid in time to not be canceled or buy insurance next year, but it doesn't mean interest won't be attaching, right? And it's pretty annoying when you just wrote $100,000 check and then all of a sudden you get another bill for just a little bit of interest. So if we just pay that online, we can avoid all of those problems. And while you're doing that, go ahead and sign up for direct deposit, because I don't know how often calls have to be made to get lost checks reissued because they were never delivered, never opened, whatever it was. Those adjusters work hard to get that loss work timely. Let's reward them with a direct deposit so that money just shows up right away. Otherwise, when that check gets lost, that's who we're blaming right away, is that adjuster saying, well, I don't think you got it submitted and that's why I haven't been paid yet. So if that money can show up, we can stop some interest at the bank right away. So,
Right. Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good conversations. I guess at this point, if you're willing, I think let's take a turn to let's talk about the cattle side of things. All right, that's something that we don't always talk about when it comes to crop insurance. All right, and this is going to be livestock and protection insurance, and so let's talk about that because cattle market's been hot. Little scenario that went through my head was I was talking with a guy here locally that owns his own cattle, and he wanted to take the risk off the table. He did some hedges with those, which I think is a really good idea to take the risk off the table where the prices are where they are, right? I think that's a really good business move. He locked in some profit. But with some hedges like that, the traditional hedge, the price is increased, it's inflated. And so now he's having to pay margin calls, right? Different kind of margin here, right? So he's having to pay money back in because the price has gone up. So let's talk about some other options to consider and let's go from there.
yeah. So LRP is what you hear it referred to as, right? It's livestock revenue protection. There's dairy. There's also livestock margin protection, not to go into the weeds on all of them, but one that's been all the talk of late has been livestock revenue protection. What that's doing is you're having that discussion with your agent and you're saying, you know what? The prices are great right now. I want to basically buy a simple put. I want to set a price floor on these cows that I have in hand, right? And so when you're doing that quote, right, things that you have to know is you got to know what kind of cow you have, what your target weight is, your target date, number head, all of those things. So what's really cool about LRP compared to crop insurance is just like when you're marketing grain, you don't have to go all in at once on like 80% of your crop, basically with your crop insurance book, right? I should have been thinking about this a little bit earlier, but you can be chasing those seasonal rallies just like you do when you're selling grain, except instead of selling your cows, you're locking in price with different endorsements through the year, endorsements to your insurance policy and saying, hey, today, yeah, I have 50 head. I like the price today. I want to lock in that price on 10 head today. And maybe next week with another rally, I want to do 10 more. So you can kind of diversify what you're doing with that policy instead of just going all in at once. I like LRP rather than going to the board because you mentioned all the puts and the calls and the expense that's associated with going up there, right? You've also got to pay commissions to your brokers, things like that. LRP, it's a simple put, really easy to understand, and it's a bargain. It's a bargain because it's subsidized just like crop insurance. So I might make a little plug here. The go-to, the norm that everybody, for the most part, has been doing and talking about is just insuring at that 100% level, okay? It's the very popular way to go. Probably 95% of the policies are written like that. But you don't have to just take 100% coverage, right? If you're willing to absorb a little bit of that deductible, say, you know what, I'm okay with some shallow losses, rather than paying $80 in premium, you might only have to pay $23 in premium if you're looking at some of these levels just a little bit lower. Oh, I don't know, a sweet spot that I'm thinking of is maybe 92.5% covered, right? So before we really decide on what level we're going to take, it would be a discussion just like on your crop insurance. What is your break even on that cow? How much coverage do you need if that price falls out to make sure you break even? And in this environment, that's much different than an environment maybe a year or 2 years ago, right? We've got a lot of margin out there. And so maybe you're just saying, you know what? There's a lot of margin. I can afford this big premium. I want to ensure some profit as well and not just maybe my break even. So a lot of discussions to be had there. A great opportunity associated with a little bit of premium to say, I can set my floor and I can guarantee some price because at some point things will change for us on that livestock side. We got to be prepared for that. And this is one step we can take. And, you could also be going to the board, you can sell them today, number of different things. And so let's have some diversity, but let's diversify our risk out there.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I'll echo or I even add to that, the nice thing about the LRP, it's not a set quantity, right? And so when you go in to use futures contracts or options, like with the board and whatnot, you are doing those different on a set quantity, right? When you do those contracts, you're doing them on a set quantity. And so with the LRP, if you've got a smaller herd, you can do those numbers. Maybe you've got a small pen of cattle. Maybe you've got like an odd size, like a contract and a half or something like that. So you can do it on the set quantity that you want. Maybe you only want to insure 80% of them and just leave the rest of them open, or you could, like you said before, you can do them at different times as well. So there's a lot of different things a guy can do there as far as a flexibility standpoint goes.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? A lot of guys can't really participate in locking in price on the market because they don't have enough cattle to meet those contracts. So LRP is even more favorable or looked upon by those smaller producers because they've never had this chance to lock in price. And LRP will let them do it. You can just have a couple head and you can participate.
One other question there, just to clarify, when are the premiums due for LRP? Is it when you sign up or is it when at the end of the kind of the period there? When's the premiums due?
Right. Yeah, there's been some changes to that from last year's reinsurance year to this year's, but it's after that contract or that endorsement expires, right? So you're going to have that endorsement for 13 weeks, maybe up to 52 weeks. That final price after your contract expires is going to be announced. And if you have a loss, your premium will come out of your loss first, and then you'll pay the remainder later. So you have time after that contract expires to pay it. And I believe it's the first of the next month after that endorsement expires. So it does get prepared to make that premium payment if you are in a non-loss situation.
Right. So that's another thing to really consider there and keep in mind from a business standpoint. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier, kind of with the margin coverage option, using that as a floor, using that as a different type of put, right? So what's different here is our premiums are due later, right? So it's not going to affect our cash flow as much. And especially on the row crop side of things, and even for the livestock, right? We want to make sure that we can push that kind of premium or that kind of expense, so to speak, as far out as we can, right? And so, especially if you're going to the banker and say, "Hey, I want to do this," and say, "Hey, I want to put a floor in, and I want to use a put on the Chicago Board of Trade, and the premiums are going to be due now, basically, or the cost for that put's going to be due now." Okay, so he's going to say, "Okay, well, what's it going to cost? Whatever the dollar amount is," and then to say, "Hey, I want to use LRP, but the premium is not going to do until the cattle go to town." He's going to be like, "Do that one because that doesn't require any additional cash to come out of the account now." And usually, some of those different put options, setting the floor, they can be a little pricier versus, say, going to the, basically kind of doing a hedge contract there. And I'm kind of trying to watch the way I'm speaking here so I don't step outside of my territory. But from a cash flow standpoint, is where I'm going with this, is several different things to kind of keep in mind there.
Hey, you're selling it. You're doing a great job selling LRP. That cash is a great thing to bring up. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I guess we covered a lot of information here today. Anything else that you want to kind of cover, add? Otherwise, I'll maybe summarize this a little bit and then we can have some closing thoughts.
yeah, to summarize, is crop insurance is living and breathing, and we're constantly making some decisions. So, it's something we need to be reviewing last year's policies going into harvest. After harvest is over, did we get what we wanted out of that policy with what prices and yields did on our farm? Again, we're never done making decisions on that next crop. Okay. So just like your seed purchasing decision, your machinery, everything else, crop insurance has just got to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. With that being said, a couple of the different things that we covered today, some recent changes here coming out to the subsidy and some of the different programs for next year, even, but then also this margin coverage option, a way to basically take advantage of a third price discovery. And so that might be a thing to consider for you. All right. And so a couple other things is here is keep in mind, like with all of these, we've got sales closing coming up end of September. So that's going to be a date that'll be right around the corner before we know it. And then as we get into harvest, let's keep in mind where these different fall price discoveries are going to be at. If we're going to have like a price indemnity from that standpoint, keep in mind some of the different coverage levels that you took. And then as we get into the fall, keep in mind silage appraisals if you're going to be chopping silage or cutting silage. And then also recording any production history, right? Try to find maybe a system that works good to do that. That's easy to upload or easy to use, I should say. And then just find something that works best for you. And then obviously we covered LRP there at the end. If you're in the livestock industry, specifically cattle, I should say, really good times right now. Let's take advantage of it. Let's not leave all that risk on the table. Let's not laying awake at night wondering when this thing's going to fall out of bed, right? Let's do our due diligence as business owners to make sure that we're taking some risk off the table and utilizing all of these different, I guess, say options out there, the different technologies with the crop insurance and all of that stuff. So we covered a lot of information here today, and I really am grateful for Landon coming on here and educating the listeners and myself as we talk about all the different things that are changing. And once again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. All of the different producers out there, all the farmers that you probably look up to that are doing a really good job, that are profitable even in the down years, and that are just making leaps and bounds. They're probably doing a lot of things right. And this is one of them with crop insurance. They're not letting this fall through the cracks. They're not letting it be an afterthought. They're staying on top of mind with all the different changes happening. That's why this conversation is relevant and important. So I appreciate Landon coming on today. Any closing thoughts as we get to rounding this out? And definitely make sure you tell people where they can find you.
Yeah. If you want to reach out, you can call me on my cell phone. Phone number is 402-506-3109. And my email address is just landonshafer@hotmail.com. But yes, it's going to be a short time frame that we're going to have to be really busy and get a lot done before 9:30, because I think to do everybody justice, everybody's going to need to take a quick peek at MCO. Whether they take it or not, we're making decisions. So that's what we'll be working on here.
Absolutely. And I guess I'll just kind of reiterate that one more time. If you've got questions, maybe your crop insurance agent isn't bringing any of this stuff up. Maybe you just want to explore some different things that maybe how Landon could help you. And maybe you don't want to talk to him directly. Maybe just reach out to myself and I can share some different ways how he's been a really big asset to our farm. Kind of that different. Yes, he's our agent, but he's also an advisor too. So a lot of value in having the right people on your team. So reach out to me, reach out to Landon. Don't let this fall through the cracks. Make sure you're keeping this at the forefront of your mind. But I guess that's about all I have for today. Any closing comments? Otherwise, we'll round this one out.
Nope, I'm good. Thanks, Garrett. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good. Well, thanks guys for joining us, and we will catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram at Garrett Ruskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.